Well, hello, viewers who are online already. We're still waiting for the official start time of 5:30, so don't get too excited. I'm going to wait till exactly 5:30 before starting this party. So hang in there. There are plenty of effects can I add in the meantime? Hang in there. Still waiting for the official 5:30 start time. So one more minute to go. Grab a drink. Is that better? Hmm. Ooh, that's good. All right. Looks like it is almost 5:30. Give it another 30 seconds or so, and we're ready to go. Okay, it is officially 5:30, people, and we are live. I see here on Google Hangouts there are 8 people watching. On YouTube, there are probably a lot more. So I'm assuming the entire class is dialed in. Hold on one second. I got to check just one thing. So bear with me. Bear with me. I got like 3 computers open here because I'm a dork. And I just got to look at what's going on here. Come on. Bear with me. Still looking. 1 second. 1 second. Gotta check something out. 1 second. 1 second. Okay. By the way, as this presentation unfolds, you'll note that over here is my Twitter handle. I'm checking the YouTube feed right now. We have 10 people watching. I just have to fix one thing before we start. So fix. Great, everything's ready to go. Fantastic. Okay, like I said, right here is my Twitter handle, @dionandon. I'm only accepting questions via Twitter. If you don't have a Twitter account, now's your time to get one, or tell a friend and they will tweet me the questions. On my secondary computers, I have the questions set up. As well, I just uploaded the presentation for today on the website, and we are ready to go, ladies and gentlemen. The technology tends to be wonky at times, so if you find any issues like the audio is screwing up or the screen freezes, tweet me right away and I will investigate. In the meantime, let me choose a different setup here. Let's choose horns. Yay, horns. Okay, right on. So going now to the presentation. I'm starting the presentation and I'm going to start sharing my screen now. Excellent. So right now, you should see the big screen. You should see the screen that says Intro to Epidemiology, Experiments, and RCTs. If you do not see that screen, someone tweet me right away. Right? Excellent. Everyone sees the screen. Fantastic. Right. Let's begin. So I want to start by talking about the scientific method for a second. And I know that we all think we know the scientific method, and really, in my opinion, the scientific method really doesn't exist in real life. In real life, we kind of start with commissioned science, either by our funder or by government, or within the portfolio of our research programs. But classically, the way that science is supposed to unfold is that we have an observation, an idea. Newton is sitting under the tree, an apple falls on his head, which actually did not happen, and he has an idea. So the example I have here is, hey, all the pygmies with doofus disease I've met are all left-handed. By the way, these slides were converted from PowerPoint to Google Slides, and so the formatting might be slightly off. We'll see how it turns out. So that's the observation. I see, hey, pygmies have doofus disease. That's great. And so I have a hypothesis. The hypothesis that maybe there's some kind of relationship between left-handedness and doofus disease among pygmies. And so I devise a research question, as in, what is the prevalence of doofus disease among left-handed and right-handed pygmies in a particular place? And I've chosen the Valley of Dionandia as the place that I care about. And so I need a data source to examine to answer that question. And I choose the three main doofus disease clinics in Greater Dionandia. I need a design now. I'm going to choose one of the many designs that we've studied in class, maybe a cross-sectional design, a cohort design, or even an RCT, which we learned about today. By the way, you wouldn't choose an RCT because left-handedness and right-handedness are not changing exposures. But anyway, then we have a project. Right, so that's traditionally how it works, and that's kind of what we pretend to do in your poster projects. Now, the difference between an hypothesis and a research question is debatable. Different people have different takes on what the differences are. This is my take on it. First, we have a broad topic or title. That's what we end up discussing at the end of the day, like pygmies and doofus disease and left-handedness. We have a question that's relatively specific, like, is there a relationship between left-handedness and doofus disease amongst pygmies? Then we have an hypothesis. The hypothesis, in my opinion, is a testable question, one that we can perform stats upon or some kind of analysis. Once we have the answer to our hypothesis, we answer our research question, and that drives discussion of the broader topic. Some people swap these two, the research question and hypothesis, as define them in an opposite way. There's no reason you should care. This is just a convenient cascading hierarchy of how to think about this. If it helps you, that's great. If it doesn't help you, then forget it. Okay? So here's an example. Maybe your research topic is physical activity and cardiovascular disease is what you care about. Because some people, for example, have been coming up to me and talking about their poster topic, saying things like, I care about schizophrenia and marijuana. Okay, so that's a topic. The problem, though, would be something a bit more structured. For example, is there a link between the lack of physical activity and hypertension? Or is there a relationship between increased smoking of marijuana and diagnosis with schizophrenia? The research question would be, will 30 minutes of moderate activity daily reduce hypertension in office workers? Right? That's more structured and specific. An hypothesis is really specific. So I mentioned here that the hypothesis section is the thing that we most commonly see in the methods section because this is what we are aiming to answer statistically or methodologically or systematically. And at the end of the day, this is what our methods can tell us, and the rest is what our imaginations and intellect tell us. So again, we can never divorce the human animal, the wisdom, the intelligence, the creativity of the human scientist from the rigor and systematicity and roboticness of the science. So for your poster, maybe you do something like this. So you have a topic like autism and diet. You have a research question like, is eating cheese within the first few years of life associated with having autism among Ontario boys? Okay, your method would be probably a literature review, right? Some sort of structured literature review of peer-reviewed studies, and you narrowed it down to a certain year and language, and here are your keywords for searching, and your results would be what you find, and you conclude things from it. So that would be the summary, the skeleton of what you can do in your poster presentation. I'm finding people, you are not responsible for the evidence. You are responsible for how you treat the evidence. In other words, if at the end of the day you find that the published literature is crappy, there's not a whole lot out there, you're not responsible for that. That's not your fault. It's not your fault that scientists suck. What you are responsible for is how you deal with the fact that scientists suck. Right? Can you identify the suckitude, and can you suggest ways of sucking less? Or maybe you found extraordinarily good evidence, and now your skills will be in parsing through it and finding some kind of wisdom out of the whole affair. Right, so moving on to today's topic, and I will pause for a second to see if any questions manifest on my Twitter feed. Waiting. Checking Twitter, and nothing comes in my Twitter feed. I guess everyone is clear. Today we're talking about experiments, and specifically clinical trials, which is the classic kind of experiment within health science and within epidemiology specifically. Remember, the distinctive characteristic of an experiment is that the investigator, you or me, actually changes something, actually causes someone to have an exposure, changes a variable. In an observational study, let's say you're looking at smoking and lung cancer, you choose whether to smoke or not. I just watch you. In an experiment, I would make you smoke, and then I'd watch you. That's the subtle distinction. And a randomized controlled trial is a specific kind of experiment that is randomized and controlled. And those two characteristics make it something quite special. Now, remember this graph, this chart. This summarizes what I think rather, is the way that study designs can be taxonomized. And again, this is my taxonomy. Not everyone will agree with this, but I think it's useful. Remember, we have a universe of qualitative study, a universe of quantitative study, where epidemiology is analyses. Analyses is when we seek to have an association or relationship between two or more variables. And in that universe, we have observational designs and experimental designs. We've already looked at the observational designs, the case controls, the cohorts, the cross-sectionals, and even those more exotic designs like the case cohorts and the nested case controls, things that you're not responsible for, by the way. Well, then we have the experiments, and these are the things that the layperson tends to think about when they think about science in general, right? And these are interventional trials, things that the investigator can intervene about and change. In our pyramid of evidence, where the best evidence is at the top and the worst evidence is at the bottom, there is some debate over how to rank things, but pretty much everybody agrees that near the top is the randomized controlled trial, the RCT, which is the purest kind of experiment in health science. Some people would argue that systematic reviews based upon RCTs should be above the RCT. Other people would argue that a really good, perfectly well done, spectacularly well funded, oh my God, so good, single randomized controlled trial is better than a systematic review. But again, that's a matter of opinion. Most people will put the systematic reviews on top, the RCTs number 2, the observational studies under that, and beneath that, everything else. So we care a lot about the RCTs. It's considered to be one of, if not the highest form of evidence. The randomized nature of the randomized trial is what makes it so special. So we can use the randomized trial in a variety of contexts. We can use it to evaluate new drugs or treatments for diseases. That's typically where we come across it most often. So these are expensive ordeals, which is why drug companies, rich drug companies, tend to sponsor them the most. They have obviously a vested interest in seeing if their drugs work or not, but they also have the resources for seeing if their drugs work or not. We use it as well to assess new programs and for methods of delivering healthcare. In fact, anything that you can divide between two groups, you can use a randomized controlled trial for. Not always randomized, but pretty much always controlled. We can do something about. So experiments of this nature, maybe not always randomized, but experiments of this nature are often used in evaluating programs, educational programs, health delivery programs. In one of my many incarnations as a health researcher, one of my jobs was to look at ways of using experiments like this to assess the quality of government interventions in public healthcare. For example, the government has funded healthcare in this community, but not that community. Can we use an experiment to assess whether or not that funding regimen was effective or not? Now, I'm getting off on a tangent there. Today, we will not cover some of the more exotic aspects of experiments, in particular something called a quasi-experiment or natural experiment or an ecological study. Those we'll cover in next class, but those are manifestations of an experiment as well. And we tend to encounter those things a lot in program evaluations and in international health. Today we're focusing just on the randomized controlled trial, the RCT, which is the purest kind of health science experiment. And it's most often used, again, to evaluate things, to evaluate interventions. So the way it works is first you identify a population that you wish to extrapolate to. You divide it into two groups. Those two groups, the dividing process is a random process. We randomize our individuals into the group that will receive treatment or the group that will not receive treatment. Now, the group that doesn't receive treatment, they can either be one of three things. They can receive nothing, they can receive some kind of placebo, or they can receive the other kind of basic care. Let me explain what that means. If you receive nothing, then really I'm comparing whether or not my new treatment, my new drug, is better than nothing. Pretty much everything is better than nothing if you stop and think about it. So that's not really an effective way to spend the millions of dollars I'm going to spend on RCT. If I'm devising a new migraine drug, for example, I've probably gone through a lot of money, a lot of animal testing, a lot of observational testing to make sure that it works to some extent. So to determine that it works better than nothing is not very useful. If it's better than placebo, which is another kind of nothing, and we'll talk about placebo more in a second, that doesn't help me a lot either, because I'm only testing whether or not it's better than someone's imagination, and usually it is. If it's better than the other standard care, on the other hand, I win out. I win out big, because I'm saying if another drug already exists on the market, I'm trying to replace that drug. I'm trying to see if my new drug is better than that other drug. That's the first thing it gets me. And the second thing it gets me is that it allows me to do this ethically. Because if my control group were getting nothing or a placebo, that can be argued to be unethical. I have struggling, hurting people here, and I'm giving them nothing. What kind of asshole am I? On the other hand, if I'm giving them the drug that's currently on the market, that's fine. That's what they would have gotten anyway, so I'm not being an asshole. So most RCTs today, the control group is the current prevailing accepted treatment, and the treatment group is the new treatment that I'm trying to test. That's all I'm saying. Then I just compare the results in my randomized groups. Simple as that, right? But why is it so expensive then? Okay? So here's how it looks. We begin with a study population. I randomize into my two groups. One of them gets a treatment and one of them doesn't. In this graphic, I've said that it gets a placebo. It doesn't have to get a placebo. It can get the other standard care. Sometimes I have more than one control group. We can talk about that next class as well. Sometimes I've got a variety of controls. That way, in one go, I can compare my new treatment to different populations. It's the randomization process that's so interesting. Why do we do it, first of all? Well, we do it because we want to control for certain factors. Let's say I am testing a new migraine drug, and I've got a bunch of people in front of me, and I'm going to put them into two groups. And I'm going to say this group gets a new migraine drug and that group doesn't, and we'll see which group ends up having more migraines after a month. The one that got the drug preventing migraines, the ones that didn't. Fair enough, except I know that women get migraines more so than men. So if my group, the treatment group, it has more women than men, it's going to get more migraines anyway. So I'm actually biasing my study to find a smaller effect size. On the other hand, if the other group got more women, the group that got the placebo or the control group, then I'm biasing my study away from finding a treatment effect, right? Because the women are a confounder. But I know that gender is a confounder here. So as you know, what I would do usually is I'd make sure that I have equal numbers of women in both groups, or I would just do the test on women, or I would just do it on men, or I do the men and women separately. There are all kinds of ways of controlling for that. The same goes if I thought that older people were more likely to get migraines than younger people. I could control for that. I can control for anything that I know about. The question is, what don't I know about? Maybe there are genetic factors that predispose somebody to migraine. Maybe there are factors about the nature of the day they had today, or their height. Who knows? What the randomization does, it allows us to have, theoretically, a somewhat equal distribution of the factors that I don't know about. And that way I can be statistically confident to some extent, that I've controlled to a high degree potential confounding here. Okay, so again, randomization is meant to control for the factors that I don't know about. Remember blinding. Okay, we're going to talk more about blinding in a second, but blinding is when some people don't know what they're getting. So why do we blind? We'll talk about that in a second. First, let's go through the advantages and disadvantages of an RCT. The RCT is considered the only undeniable method for measuring causality between a risk factor and an outcome. We've talked about causality already in we did sufficiency and necessity, and we looked at the Bradford-Hill criteria, right? So we learned that cohort studies and case control studies give us strength of association, but they don't really tell me for sure that something causes something else. The RCT pretty much guarantees that something caused something else because we watch it happen. If I lock a bunch of people in a room and make them smoke for 20 years, and I lock a bunch of other people in a room who are almost identical to that first group, and I don't make them smoke for 20 years, and I see which ones get lung cancer, well, I can be pretty sure that it was the smoking that caused the lung cancer because I controlled. The C is for control sometimes, RCT. I controlled for all the factors that could have gone wrong here, that could have caused an observation. So that's why it's a strong sense of causality. I just got a Twitter message, and no, it's not a message. It's somebody following me. Defofia. Hello, Defofia. Thanks for following me on Twitter. I assume you're in my class. Maybe not. Who knows? Okay. So it's a gold standard. The advantages to the RCT is that we control for the extraneous variables. So in a really controlled clinical environment, I can actually lock you in a room or keep you, at the very least, I can keep you well observed for the duration of the study. And I can choose you to lack certain extraneous characteristics. Remember, a cohort study, I just get some people who smoke, some people who don't smoke, and I watch them in the community as they unfold. Right? And I can't control what else they do. I can try to do so statistically, but I can't do so a priori. With a clinical trial, we attempt to control for certain things a priori. We attempt to control for other exposures you might have, to keep you away from a nuclear reactor for measuring cancer incidences, or to control your diet or things like that. So we control these extraneous variables. The temporal relationship is well established, meaning I know that the exposure, the intervention, the migraine pill, came before the outcome, came before the migraine, because I gave it to you. And I measured the baseline characteristics. So I know that the cause came before the effect. And if there's blinding, we'll talk about blinding in a second, the conclusions are hard to argue with. So this means all these advantages here come together to form something we call internal validity. The RCT has pretty strong internal validity. That means that the relationship that I observe in the context of an RCT is probably real. It's valid internally. I have another Twitter follower, Renee. Hello, Renee. I love doing these YouTube lectures. I get more Twitter followers. The disadvantages of the RCT, though, is, as I mentioned, it's crazy expensive. To do it well, I got to pay people. I got to have probably hospital rooms. I got to have all kinds of clinicians. It's a lot of work and cost. That's why drug companies are the ones who tend to do a lot of them. The second is it doesn't represent the real world. And we'll give an example later on when I talk about depression medications. But think about this. If I'm controlling for all these extraneous variables, I'm looking for people who will finish the study. I'm looking for people who are educated enough to give me their responses in a lucid manner. I'm looking for examples of individuals who don't have other exposures. Those aren't typical. And so it may have a lot of internal validity. It may not have a lot of external validity, meaning maybe I can't generalize to the real world, which is why drug companies have post-market studies. Once the drug hits the marketplace, they monitor its behavior in the market to see if it was different than its behavior within the context of an RCT. And lastly, ethics. As I mentioned a couple times in class, you can't necessarily do an RCT on everything because it's not ethical to make some 5-year-olds smoke for 20 years. At the same time, it may not be ethical to put someone in a control group. Let's say you are testing out a brand new, super duper, high-tech, amazing cancer drug, and you have some people with cancer in your test group and some people with cancer in your control group. Ethically, you would give the people with cancer in the control group the existing standard of care. And the ones in the treatment group, you would give them your new super duper medication. Now, ask yourself this. If you honestly think that your new cancer drug is so super duper spiffy, fantastic, is it ethical not to give it to everybody? Obviously, the scientific method requires that you don't give it to everybody. But that's the conundrum the scientists face. They wouldn't be testing these things if they didn't think they worked. If they think they work, why can't they give it to the people who suffer? So that's always something that hangs over our head. Something called Intensive is now following me on Twitter. Hi, Intensive. I don't know who you are, but your picture is an egg. So that's got to mean something. All right, next slide. Let's talk about that randomization process now. Now, the classic method of making sure that my two groups are randomly assigned is I have like 20 people that I'm going to randomize. First one comes to me, I flip a coin. If it's heads, you're my treatment group. If it's tails, you're my control group. So flip a coin, first person, get heads, you're my treatment group. Next person, flip a coin, you're my control group, and so forth. The problem is that with that method, yes, I guarantee random assignment, but it's conceivable that I'm going to flip 20 heads in a row. It's not likely, but it's conceivable. And so it really doesn't guarantee equivalence, equivalent numbers in both groups, and that can be a problem. It doesn't presume also that each participant is the same. It just says that they are randomly allocated. Oh, I got a question. Intensive wants a shout out. I just gave you a shout out. Want 2 shout outs? Come on. And Amyl Nitrate here says, are RCTs usually longer compared to other methods? Not necessarily, no. It depends on what you are trying to measure. It's possible to do an RCT in a week if the duration of the treatment effect you're measuring is a week, whereas a cohort study could last years or decades. It all depends on what you're measuring. Okay? Right. Okay. Moving on. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about 2 kinds of analytical approaches to RCTs. There's the per protocol or intent to treat methods. So the way that the RCT works again is we have our study population and we randomize them into one of 2 groups, the treatment group and the control group. Now, several things might happen after they are randomized. In very rare instances, somebody may actually switch groups. It's difficult to imagine a scenario when we permit that, but it has happened. Sometimes there is an allocation by error, or sometimes there's a rebalancing issue, or sometimes one person is not responding a certain way and we decide to switch them over for ethical reasons. I don't know. It's rare, but it does happen. More commonly, we would lose somebody to follow up, right? So we recruit some people and they end up in either the treatment group or the control group, and then they get bored after a week and say, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, and they go home. Okay, fine. So what do we do with their data, though? So if we analyze them according to what they actually received, that's the on-protocol or per-protocol analysis. Meaning, maybe you started out in the control group, but you end up in the treatment group. I'm going to analyze you with the guys who receive the treatment. Or if you started out in the treatment group and you move to the control group, I'm going to analyze you with the guys in the control group. Or if you started out in either group and you fucked off, you said, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm still going to call you up and find out what happened to you. And I'm going to analyze you as whether or not you got the drug. Obviously, if you left the treatment, you didn't receive the drug, so I ignore you. That would be the per protocol approach. That makes sense. That's intuitive, right? If you got the drug, you're analyzed as if you got the drug. Makes perfect sense. The problem is it's not considered to be the more rigorous approach. The more rigorous approach is the intention to treat analysis. The intention to treat analysis says that whatever you were supposed to get at first, that's the group that we put you in. So let's say you started out in the control group, and then for some reason, I can't even imagine what reason might be, we move you to the treatment group. When we get your data, we put your data in with the control group. That's where you start out with. More commonly, if you started out in the treatment group and you left the treatment, the study, and you went away, and obviously you didn't get better because you didn't get the drug, we're still going to pretend that you're in the treatment group. The reason for this is that you have to consider that the thing that we're measuring here isn't just the drug, it's the experience of receiving the drug. right? So maybe the reason that you left the study is because the drug was giving you side effects, or maybe you were frustrated with the shape or the size of it or something stupid like that. You never know what it might be. And if I don't include you in that analysis, I'm actually biasing my results away from the null hypothesis. So the intention to treat analysis biases our results toward the null hypothesis. And every time we bias ourselves toward the null hypothesis, we're being more conservative. We're less likely to make a type 1 error. Right? So again, the intention to treat is considered to be more philosophically superior. And the saying around this is, if you randomize, you analyze. If you randomize, you analyze. Looks like these sayings. Remember, if the P is low, the null must go. If you randomize, you analyze. And that means once we've randomized you into either group, that's where your data remains, regardless if you leave that group and regardless if you leave the study. Cool? Intention to treat. Okay, now I mentioned the different types of control groups. We use the control groups to rule out the effects of extraneous variables, because it's not sufficient that you do better than nothing. What matters is that you do better than a control group. I've given that example so many times in class of that dinner party I was at where someone proudly declared that, did you know that 100% of perverts in jail have looked at porn? And my response was 100% of perverts in jail have eaten bread as well, right? Because it doesn't matter that you compare them to nothing. You're always going to find an effect. What matters is, did you compare the perverts to people who didn't eat bread? Right? If you find out the people who didn't eat bread, none of them are in jail for sex crimes, then there is a strong association between eating bread and sex crimes. Right? So there you go. So that's why a control group is so important. And if you haven't got a control group, what you have is an uncontrolled trial. And I'm going to show an example, a couple of examples of uncontrolled trials in a bit. As I mentioned, the control group can receive either the standard existing intervention, the drug that's currently on the market, a placebo, which is a pill or a treatment that really resembles the treatment or pill you're testing, or nothing at all. The thing about a placebo, and we'll talk about placebo in a second, is that it must resemble the thing you're testing so much so that you can't tell the difference. Okay. Now, if we're going to draw any valid comparisons, we have to have some reasonable equivalency between the two groups, and equivalency in many ways, in their composition and in their size. Here is a historical example. And by the way, people always ask me this. No, I don't test you on whether or not you know the history of these examples. This is just for your education, your edification, and your entertainment. Okay, so I'll read this out to you in my best. Which accent would you like? Indian, French, or English? No? None? Okay, I'll do it with no accent then. At length my oil lacked, and I was constrained to apply in its place a digestive made of yolks of eggs, oil of roses, and turpentine. That night I could not sleep at my ease, fearing that by lack of cauterization I would find the wounded upon which I had not used the said oil dead from the poison. Okay, let me explain what's going on here. There was a surgeon in the 16th century who had patients who were wounded in some way, and typically what he would do is cauterize the wounds, meaning he would burn them. And he didn't cauterize some of them because for some reason, maybe he ran out of fuel, I don't know. So instead he made up some strange combination of eggs and oil and stuff and put those on the wounds. So continuing, I raised myself early to visit them, and beyond my hope I found those to whom I had applied the digestive medicament feeling but little pain, their wounds neither swollen nor inflamed, and having slept through the night. Fast forward to the end here, I determined never again to burn thus so cruelly the poor wounded. So the point here is that this individual didn't plan on doing a clinical trial, but he did by accident, right? So he ran out of the cauterization tools, so he ended up not cauterizing everybody else, and discovered that, in fact, the ones that he had applied boiling oil to were in horrible pain, and the ones he didn't weren't. So he decided, oh, look at that, the boiling oil is bad for you. That's quite the conclusion. So amyl nitrate, that's what I call Amal, by the way, amyl nitrate. He wants an Asian accent. Can't do Asian accents, sorry, that would be racist. Can I do an English accent? No, I can't. So this is another example. This is a planned trial, meaning that historically they intended to do this. This is from 1747. You may know that the English Navy got its name of limeys from the fact that they ended up carrying limes on board. And they carried limes on board in order to counteract scurvy. And they knew that lemons and limes and other citric fruits prevented scurvy as a result of studies like this. So James Lind writes, I took 12 patients in the scurvy on board the Salisbury at sea. The cases were as similar as I could have them. They lay together in one place and had one diet common to them all. 2 of those were ordered a quart of cider per day. 2 others took 25 guts of elixir vitriol. 2 others took 2 spoonfuls of vinegar. 2 were put under a course of seawater. 2 others had 2 oranges and 1 lemon given them each day, and so forth. So at the end, he discovers that the ones that got the oranges and lemon did better than the rest, and in fact, he recruited them to be nursemaids to the other ones. But look at the first paragraph there. He actually made sure that the individuals were as similar as he could have them, and he even controlled their diet. So this was clearly a well-controlled clinical trial. Now, they weren't randomized, they weren't blinded, and the sample sizes were quite small, so it's quite rudimentary as planned trials go. But the effect size of a citric fruit and its effect on scurvy is so great that all these errors were inconsequential. He ended up finding a very strong effect size, a strong effect. And this is from Dr. Peacock. Should I try Indian accent for this one? One day when I was a junior medical student, a very important Boston surgeon visited the school and delivered a great treatise on a large number of patients. I'll stop. That's offensive, Ray. Stop that. You don't want to have that on YouTube. People will complain. They'll say you're racist without realizing that you're brown. Okay, so he's talking about how he had given surgery to a large number of patients to test out his theory of vascular reconstruction. So at the end of the lecture, one student asked, "Do you have any controls?" And the surgeon hit his desk and said, "Do you mean that I not operate on half of the patients?" And the hall grew very quiet then, and the voice in the back of the room says, "Yes, that's what I had in mind, that you not operate on half the patients." And the great doctor really got angry and said, "Of course not. That would have doomed half of them to their death." And it was quiet then, and one could scarcely hear the small voice reply, "Yes, but which half?" Yes, well, okay. Funny, haha, joke. All right, then we have this last example I've got for you. This is a non-random control. So a sea captain was given samples of anti-nausea pills to test during a voyage. The need for controls was carefully explained to him. Upon return of the ship, the captain reported the results enthusiastically. Practically every one of the controls was ill, and not one of the subjects had any trouble. Really wonderful stuff. Okay, he found a treatment effect. Clearly, he can reject his null hypothesis and conclude that statistically the pills work. So a skeptic asked how he had chosen the controls, and he said, "Oh, I gave the stuff to my seamen and used the passengers as controls." Do you see the problem with his selection of controls? If you don't, here it is. So the seamen clearly are used to sea travel and will not get nauseous. Therefore, he gave them the stuff. He gave the passengers the controls. The passengers are highly likely to get nauseous, the seamen highly unlikely to get nauseous. He has biased his experiment strongly away from the null hypothesis. Therefore, the conclusion that the anti-nausea medication works is highly in question. That's how you do the epidemiology, my children. That's how it's done. Okay, other ways of selecting controls that might be non-random are problematic. And believe me when I say that historically lots of different ways are used. Quite commonly what's used is the day of admission. So you set up a desk at a hospital, and one day people come in and you enroll them into the study group. And the next day people come in and you enroll them into the control group. Why not, right? The problem is that that introduces certain kinds of biases. Like some days kids are off school, and some days maybe there's a free transportation on the subway or things like that. I used to have an example here talking about the BCG vaccination against tuberculosis in New York, and had actual data to show you. I took that slide out for some reason, so I don't have it anymore. But believe me when I say that these other methods of trying to randomize who's in your groups, if it's not overtly a mathematical randomization process, is rife with bias. One method that survey samplers use is the birthday method. So we call up and say, I want to talk to whoever had a birthday most recently. right? And whoever it is that will answer the phone. But then you've got clustering effects. If what you're measuring is a disease that has a seasonal capacity that's related to the season of your birth, you're oversampling those individuals. So all these methods are rife with some kinds of biases, unless you do it mathematically. So when you're randomizing, you are trying to achieve balance. Balance in what? You're trying to achieve balance in distribution of characteristics across both groups. Ideally, you're also trying to achieve an equivalence in numbers. That's very difficult. Next class, I'm actually going to show you a block randomization method that guarantees equivalence of numbers across both groups. You're also trying to reduce selection bias and some kinds of accidental bias. And that's why randomization is so important. It minimizes the chances of selection bias. The types of randomization. I mentioned the coin toss, right? Heads, you're in this group, tails, you're in that group. We've got methods called block randomization. I'll show you that next time. In the good old days before computers, we had random number tables. So the RAND Corporation actually published these tables of random numbers in giant textbooks. Isn't that amazing? Books filled with random numbers was one of the major products published by this corporation. That was a thing we had not that long ago. And you'd open the page and you close your eyes and you put your finger down, and that number would dictate the number of the person that you chose to be in your group. Urn randomization is kind of like picking a number out of an urn. It's like that. And all these other types that, I don't need you to know what all these things are. Just be aware that there are different ways of doing so. So very often we do numbered envelopes that are picked out of boxes and things like that. Now let's talk about blinding. We've mentioned it a couple times, and I think most of you know what it is. But blinding is when either the participants or the researchers don't know what you got. So a single blinded study is when the participants don't know which drug they got, if they got the drug or the placebo, right? And we'll talk more about placebo in a second. Double blinding is when neither the participant nor the investigator knows which drug you got. Obviously, somebody has to know, right? And that that information is sealed and put in a safe, right? That's why when we finally find out which drug you got, we call it breaking the seal. It is literally sealed, right? And why we break the seal? We break the seal at the end of the study, or sometimes we break the seal if something extraordinary is happening, like someone's having an extreme reaction or really getting a lot better. And so we need to know, is that the result of the drug or something else? Okay. So again, single blinding is when the participant doesn't know what he got. Double blinding is when both the participant and the researcher doesn't know what he got. There is no such thing as blinding when only the researcher doesn't know. That doesn't make any sense. If that were to happen, then the study would be about the researcher and they would be the participant. So it doesn't really work. Now, is there something called triple blinding? Yes, there is. A triple blinded study is when the data analyst also doesn't know who got what. And that's a level of rigor that's a little obsessive, but I can see how it could come handy. So yeah, so double blinded trials are the standard. Triple blinded trials are coming into fashion as well. So let's talk a bit about the biases. We've covered these a little bit already, but two biases in particular are why we have blinding and randomization. They are the Hawthorne Effect and the Rosenthal Effect, and we've talked about these already, but let's go over them again. So the Hawthorne Effect is named after the Hawthorne factory, Hawthorne Works, right? And it was, in 1955, it was observed that at this factory, the workers worked harder when there was light. And that kind of implies that if you could see them, they worked harder. Ooh, a Twitter comment. No, it's not. It's a new follower. It's Chantal Cote is following me. Hey, Chantal. Welcome to the world of Dionandan Twitter. Right. So what this means for RCTs is if you're in a study, you're being watched. The light is on you, and so you are behaving differently. That's Hawthorne Effect. Or if you think you are getting a drug, that's kind of like being watched, and so maybe your body responds differently. A placebo effect. That's a Hawthorne Effect. So that's why Hawthorne Effect is why we have blinding and why we have blinding. Rosenthal Effect is also called the Pygmalion Effect, and Pygmalion in Greek mythology is about a self-fulfilling prophecy. What it essentially says is if the researcher thinks that he gave you a drug, he's going to treat you differently and maybe you'll respond differently. Related to the Rosenthal effect is the Golem effect, G-O-L-E-M. And the Golem effect is a subcategory of Rosenthal effect, and that's a self-fulfilling prophecy where if you treat someone bad, they'll respond badly. If I think you're stupid, you'll do poorly on the test, even if you're not stupid. An example of this is if you go to a school and you tell the teacher, hey, you see that kid over there? You see Frank over there? He's a genius. So he's an idiot. Let's say genius. He's a genius. Frank's a genius. You should watch him and let us know when his genius manifests. And over time, the teacher is spending so much time observing Frank that Frank actually does start to display genius traits. But Frank was never a genius. I lied. Researchers lied. It's the fact that the teacher is spending so much time with Frank that he starts behaving like a smarter kid. That's the Rosenthal effect. The Golem effect is when the teacher is told that Frank's an idiot, and the teacher treats him like an idiot, and so he behaves like an idiot. So the Golem effect is when he aims for the bottom. Anyway, so the Rosenthal and Hawthorne effect is why we have blinding, because the relationship between the investigator and the participant can affect the effect size, can affect the nature of the effect. Right, placebo. The word placebo means I please. Is that Greek or Latin? Oh, I can't believe I don't know that. I think it's Greek. Someone's going to correct me. Now this is recorded on YouTube. Someone's really going to correct me. And we think it first popped into use in medicine in 18th century. There is some tension here with the Hippocratic Oath. Can you see that? The Hippocratic Oath says that doctors must do no harm. But if a doctor gives you a placebo, knowing that it's not going to cure you, that's kind of doing harm, right? So there's some ethical issues here with placebos. The placebo effect is sometimes called the physiological effect produced by placebo. The reason for that is the placebo effect is, by some standards, real. It's a physiological effect. So maybe you're getting no treatment, but your body is responding as if you are, because you think you are. Twitter question. How will an analyst be able to analyze results if he was blinded and didn't know who's getting what? Because if you don't, let's say I've got two groups of patients. I've got those in group A, those in group B. I don't know which one got the drug and which didn't, but I do know they're group A and group B. I can totally compute the incidence of cases in group A versus group B and compare them, right? I can do that. I can do that analysis without knowing the nature of group A and group B. Once I have compared the two and I have an answer, and the answer is group A is doing better than group B, then I can break the seal and see who was group A and who was group B. It's like Christmas, you know? So or election day or something. It's like, oh, or maybe at the casino, I have the results. The results are group A is better than group B. And I open the envelope. Group A was the placebo. Ooh, that means the drug doesn't work. Right? Or group A was the treatment group. Yay, that means the drug works. That's how they can do it. You don't need to know what's in the box in order to compute the numbers in the box. Right? Cool. So that's the answer. Thank you very much for that question. So placebo can be a real physiological effect. Now, some people claim that that's not true, that placebo effect is only observed in perceived experiences, like perceived pain. So it's a psychological response, not a physiological response. Another Twitter question. Placebo is a Latin word. Thank you, Lissa Blair. Placebo is a Latin word. I've learned something today. Yay! It's always nice when the professor learns something and is revealed to be an idiot. That's great. So keep in mind, it is possible that some therapies cannot be placeboed. Let's say that my intervention that I'm testing is a massage. I'm testing craniosacral massage for migraine relief. I've got my two groups. One group will get craniosacral massage, and the other group will get what? Well, I can give them the other standard treatment, which is, I don't know, ibuprofen pill, but I can't convince them that they got a massage when they didn't, because they're going to know. I can't simulate a massage. So there are many things I cannot simulate in a placebo. Right? The pill is the classic thing that I can simulate. For something like Eastern or alternative medicines, very often the intervention is not a pill, it's an experience. The example here I have is homeopathy, and we're going to go and work through a homeopathy example in a second. But homeopathy fails RCTs all the time because it's nonsense. There's nothing going on with homeopathy. And I make fun of homeopathy because homeopathy claims to be a medical intervention. It doesn't claim to be an experiential intervention. Whereas something like Eastern therapies, like, I don't know, I can't think of one offhand. I can't think of one, sorry. Qigong massage or Qigong therapy. That's an experiential therapy. That means that it's not the intervention there, or the guy touching you or the pill, whatever it is. It's the entire aspect of showing up to the office, having a cup of tea with the guy, talking out your problems, relaxing during the day, then getting your massage. That's the experience. And if I take out one aspect of that, like just the massage, I don't get the fullness of the experience. So the RCT may not be appropriate for some of those therapies. On the other hand, something like homeopathy is. And we're going to work through an example, like I said. So here is a paper that my friend Nick Behrman and I wrote about placebos for BMJ a while back. And it's not a paper, it's a letter, really. And what we are suggesting is that if an investigator guesses the allocation, let's say they guess that this individual has the drug and not the placebo, even if it's a double-blinded study, they may start to treat that person differently. When they treat that person differently, then the patient guesses that they've got the intervention and not the placebo, and they start getting better themselves, and it becomes a spiraling kind of situation. So I don't know if we're right. We just propose it as a possibility, and it's kind of exciting that these kinds of possibilities keep popping up. Like even though RCTs have been with us for decades, we can think about them in new, exciting ways. And if you want to build a career in RCT development and management, it's there for the taking. A lot of lucrative and exciting careers are built around the management of randomized controlled trials. So it's a powerful career path for those who want to pursue it. The perfect clinical trial has certain characteristics. So first is that it has to have a scientific rationale. And again, these kinds of lists here, I don't need you to memorize this stuff. This is just, so you further understand what I'm talking about. Right? So does it correspond to existing knowledge? It must have a testable hypothesis. The example here is drug A is no more than 10% more effective than drug B with an error of this, that, and that. So the more specifics we have in mind, the better. It has to be prospective, meaning, of course, it moves forward in time. You got to have a control group. It's got to be randomized. It's got to be blinded. We've got to have sufficient sample size. We have to have as few exclusion criteria as possible to make it externally valid. It has to have a rational inclusion criteria to make it internally valid. It's got to be ethical. And it has to follow the intent to treat method with minimal loss to follow-up. All those things have to be in place. And if they're not, that means the RCT is of lower quality. So even though the randomized controlled trial is the gold standard, they're not all the same. Some are better than others. As a result, there are a variety of templates that people use to measure the quality of an RCT. Right? So one of them is the consort statement. Consort was developed here in Ottawa by a friend of mine, David Moore, at CHIO, when that particular agency was called the Chalmers Research Institute. And consort is a 22-item checklist that goes through to determine whether or not an RCT is good or bad. And here are some of the things that they look at in consort. Was it randomized? How was it allocated? How was the follow-up done? How was the analysis done? All right. And here are some of the things they look at, like how much random allocation was there? Is the rationale well explained? Are the outcome measures rational? Do we have a rule for how do I know when to stop the trial? I can let it go forever, or I can stop it in 2 weeks. Maybe I want to stop when a certain proportion have demonstrated a certain outcome. That has to be well established beforehand. Are the baseline characteristics well established? And so forth. Again, I don't need you to memorize this. This is just for your edification. Related to the consort statement is something called a Haddad score. So the Haddad score talks about randomization and blindedness only. So it's a simple way to measure the quality of controlling for Hawthorne and Rosenthal effects. And an RCT receives a Haddad score of 0 to 5. Right? So, and it's not perfect. It looks at, was it randomized, was it blinded, and do they know who left and who stayed in the study. The problem is that these are very simple ways of measuring quality, maybe too simple, with a heavy reliance on blinding, but they're still important, and they're important because it gives us a a rational, agreed upon, universal, objective way to measure the quality of RCTs. So when I'm sent a paper to review for my journal, I go straight to the consort statement and go through the checklist to see how much it satisfies. It's an easy way that everyone agrees that this is a way to judge quality. So Lissa asked, do we need to know anything specific about the consort statement? No, you do not. You don't need to know any of the specifics of consort or Haddad. Just know that they exist. Know that Haddad measures a blinding and randomization. Consort is a checklist for looking at the quality of RCTs. That's all. Okay. And by the way, there are other things, other checklists out there as well. Just that consort is one of the most common ones. And you can use consort on your poster project, by the way, too. So they developed a consort statement for observational studies as well. If you wanted to, you don't have to. There are other checklists like PRISM and so forth as well. Now, there's something called the Cochrane Collaboration, which is a group of people that look to try to create very good systematic reviews based on biomedical randomized controlled trials. So there's a huge movement on to produce the best quality systematic reviews based upon objective measurements of the qualities of randomized controlled trials. You can go to the Cochrane Library, it's free, and extract a systematic review on pretty much any topic that you want. Right? So it was founded in '93, and their goal is to have as little bias as possible and have the best possible evidence for making clinical decisions with evidence-based medicine at its heart. By the way, look at the logo of the Cochrane Collaboration, the lower right here. Do you recognize that? That's a forest plot. Remember the forest plot? That's how geeky these people are. The logo is a forest plot. Love it. So let's talk a bit about the philosophy of randomized controlled trials. Remember that ethics is always an issue. What can be randomized? Some things can't be randomized. People living in cities can't be randomized. I can't say, hey, you go live in that city and don't leave, right? So some things I can't do. What's a valid placebo? If someone's dying of cancer, I don't feel right giving them nothing. Got to give them something. And when do you break the seal? All these things are ethical questions to ask. Also, I mentioned alternative therapies. The RCT may not apply to alternative therapies because of how they define their intervention. Is the experience the intervention? And therefore, the fundamental flaw and the strength of the RCT is its heavily controlled nature. The RCT, by its very nature, controls extraneous variables such that we are testing only whether or not this one thing makes a difference. And this one thing is the intervention. But that's not real life, is it? Alternative therapies purport to model real life, right? So that's the high internal validity may compromise the external validity. So let's talk about homeopathy, because I hate homeopathy. Hate it with a passion, right? If you don't know what it is, it's not naturopathy, even though they try to pretend that it is. Homeopathy is the fake science of having a little bit of what makes you sick make you well again, diluted to such extreme proportions that when they give you the drug, there's actually nothing in it. Nothing. It's crazy. So here is a statement from the British Homeopathic Association, and they complain that the RCT is not appropriate for measuring homeopathy because homeopathy is all about the individual tailoring of treatment. But you can do an RCT with this process. I can randomly select 10 individuals to be in my treatment group and 10 individuals there, and I can give my 10 individuals individualized homeopathic treatments and the other 10 not, right? I can compare the difference. So that's nonsense. So let's look at, I mentioned before that the highly controlled nature of RCTs is problematic. Here's an example. Let's say we are developing a new RCT to test a new drug that treats depression, okay? Who are we going to recruit for this study? We're going to get people who are depressed, but not too depressed, because if they're too depressed, they're going to have all kinds of problems. They have all kinds of comorbidities. They won't comply with their medication. They'll drop out. So we don't want them to be too depressed. Also, we don't want them to be not enough depressed, because they might be more likely to respond to a placebo, or maybe they're overdiagnosed. Maybe they're not really depressed. So there's that sweet zone of being not too depressed and not depressed enough. So as a result, we have here a study found that 22% of depressed people qualified for an RCT. Only 22% qualified. And yet, from the data on those 22%, the drug is prescribed to all depressed people across the entire spectrum. What does that tell us? It tells us that we rely upon the rarefied, heavily controlled, internally valid nature of an RCT to generalize for treatment to everybody, and that may not be appropriate. It's a problem. RCT is not perfect. It's not the great panacea, right? Now, the relationship between RCTs and systematic reviews. The best systematic reviews only consider the best evidence, and many will only consider high-quality RCTs. Therefore, what is the true gold standard? Is it an RCT or is it a systematic review? Like I mentioned, some people would say that a really good, really well-done, perfect RCT is better than any systematic review. I have no answer for you, only to say that there is a tension between the two. Right. So there's Reiki is another thing that I can't stand. So Reiki is one of these weird therapies. There's probably somebody in the audience right now saying, "Well, I love Reiki." Fine, spend your money on it. But Reiki is one of those things where you treat someone with the energy fields of your body, either by touching them or not touching them or standing miles away from them. It's really bizarre. So look at the systematic review. This is done on Reiki, and a lot of money is spent all the time on Reiki testing it because a lot of people want to use it. And why not? I mean, it's a beautiful idea, the idea that magic hands can make you better. It's an expression of love. It's wonderful. I get it. So I won't go through the details here, but this was a systematic review of the evidence surrounding Reiki. And they looked at 23 databases, and they used the Haddad score to assess the quality of these studies. Conclusion: the evidence is insufficient to suggest that Reiki is an effective treatment. Therefore, the value of Reiki remains unproven. And yet, the systematic review, believe it or not, is used to justify spending money on Reiki. Clearly, people don't read the studies or they don't understand what they're saying. Craziness. Let's go back to homeopathy as I get on my soapbox for a second and make some people angry. So this poor woman here attempted to kill herself using overdose on homeopathic medication. Homeopathic medication literally is drops of water, literally. So it is harmless. As a result, every year, all over England, people mockingly try to kill themselves with homeopathic medicine. It's a hilarious day, which is kind of sad because this poor woman obviously has problems. But if you can't overdose on these meds, clearly they don't work. I took this photo at a local massage clinic here in Ottawa. It's homeopathic first aid, which is hilarious. I'm trying to imagine what that looks like. I'll show you a video on Monday. It's a British comedy show that talks about homeopathic ER. Maybe you've seen it already, but it's pretty funny. If I'm in an accident and someone's running up to me with their homeopathic first aid kit, please stop them. Please call 911. All right, so there is no scientific basis for homeopathy, right? Everyone has a Guardian article about this. The studies have been done over and over again. It's done. There is no evidence for it. However, this article came out earlier this year. I think we talked about it already. I don't remember. This is a study produced by U of T. And if you read carefully, it's a study looking at the relationship between homeopathic treatment and ADHD in children. And look, it says 60% has statistically significant improvement in the primary outcome first occurring in meaningful. Okay, it says that 62% of the kids that they gave this drug to got better, right? Now, this study has been used to get more money to do a deeper investigation, and is published on the U of T Pharmacy Department's website. And this caused U of T's Nobel Prize winners, of which there are many, to write an angry letter to the president saying, "Stop this nonsense now, you're embarrassing us." Can you see the problem with this study? You probably can't because you probably haven't read the entire abstract. But I'll tell you what the problem is. The problem is there's no control group, right? They deliberately, and I say deliberately because I think it was deliberate, did not have a control group because they know that you will get better from pretty much anything. The question isn't whether or not you will get better. The question is, will you get better versus this other group that didn't get your wacky treatment? If they had a control group, they probably have no effect size whatsoever. So this, to me, is an unethical way of looking at of doing science, and I'm quite disappointed with U of T for publishing this. Okay. If we look at the history of efficacy studies in homeopathy, there's a quick scan here. 1991 from BMJ. At the moment, the evidence of clinical trials is positive but not sufficient. Okay, interesting. 2001, a meta-analysis of clinical trials on the effectiveness of homeopathy showed major weaknesses. All right. 2005, there's nothing more than placebo effect. 2006, insufficient evidence to support clinical efficacy. 2007, evidence was not sufficient, and so forth, right? So 1997, going back for a second, 1991 rather, there's some positive signs, but 10 years later, it's pretty clear there's nothing going on. And yet, the supporters of homeopathy on these websites will claim things like lots of different study types have been used to assess homeopathy, concluding that it's absolutely a scientific system simply because lots of science has attempted to assess it. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And this is from the British Homeopathic Association. 4 out of 5 major systematic reviews of RCTs and homeopathy have concluded that homeopathy has an effect greater than placebo. Really? I haven't heard that. So you go to their link and you find out it's a link to the Faculty of Homeopathy, and it says nothing of the sort. This is a brazen lie. Right? In fact, the evidence it does have is older than 1997, so all the new stuff is not cited. What does this mean? It means do not trust websites or news articles or even so-called experts like your professor of epidemiology to do your assessments, right? Read the source evidence yourself. Go and look up the actual article because you have the skills now. You have epidemiology skills. You can assess the quality of the evidence. You can look for whether it's controlled, apply the Haddad score, apply the consort statement, look for the biases that you know. Be aware of standard scientific language. We all say more research is needed. It doesn't mean that we're confused. It just means that we all want more money. Okay? So you have skills now, real skills that allow you to be a smarter person and prevent people from lying to you. Use those skills. Bottom line, the RCT is logically the gold standard of evidence. However, a perfect one is impossible. Right? We've seen that, I think. There are all kinds of flaws in how to interpret them, how to be generalizable, internal versus external validity. They're very expensive, so there isn't a lot of motivation to run them unless you expect something important to come out of it. Okay, where am I here? Okay, so let's go back to my pretty face. Hey, pretty face, here I am. Hey, how you doing? 19 viewers or more on YouTube. So that's the last slide. No more questions have come up from Twitter, so I guess everyone is clear on what's happening. That is all. So I'm going to sign off now, and I'll see you on Monday. If there are any questions, you can email me as always. And Monday's class, right? Is it Monday? I think whenever I see you next, that's when I'll see you. So see you guys later.